Good evening, all. I'm Dustin, also known as Rope Aficionado, and this is the Dominance Dialogue. Tonight, our topic is Whispers of Obedience, the Subtle Language of Submission, and our guest is Chanteuse. Chanteuse, do you mind introducing yourself and giving us a little bit about your background and experience?
Sure. And this is where I'll probably fumble over my words because it's never the same way twice. I am submissive and I am a slave to Trouvere. We have been married almost 37 years, but we've been together longer than that. We started out very egalitarian and stumbled our way into different aspects. We went through kink, we went through leader follower, XO, CEO, all of the different kinds of terms. And anytime we came across something, we did relationship tracks, trying to better our relationship because that was always our bottom focus. So I've been in his collar for about 20 years. Um, and my background is in educational psychology. I grew up in the military and I work for the military. So we also have a military lifestyle. What else would you like me to say?
Oh, I mean, do you mind diving in a little bit about your professional life? Because it seems like it'd be
Sure.
pretty pertinent.
So I work for the military. I specifically work for the Marine Corps. I've worked for them for over 16 years. And I am an educator working with the Marines to make them better uh, facilitators in the classroom. I'll say that.
Interesting. So, is it safe to assume that you have quite a bit of experience in communicating in hierarchical structures?
I would say that that's fair. Yeah.
Oh,
Doesn't always translate like what I want it to, just like anybody else. Sometimes what I will say is misconstrued. Sometimes I won't realize that my tone has changed. Um, and it will come across in a different fashion. But I try and be as diplomatic as I can because quite often I have to provide feedback that is specific to what they are doing in the classroom. Because in some instances, say for example, the information is flat out wrong. They provided it's not current or up to date. So I have to provide them that information on this is how you find that background for researching it to get a little bit more than what you may have pulled out of a lesson plan. Um, I talk about everything from lesson prep on if they're doing anything from PowerPoint in the classroom to different teaching technologies. Um, Sometimes they're questioning techniques. I have some that in the past have done very closed questions that lead students to just be answering yes or no, and that's fine if you're setting things up for like a polling style. But if you want something where you're wanting them to expand on their answers, you want to change what kinds of questions that you may be asking them.
mhm.
So there's a number of different things along that I cover in a work environment.
I like that. And just so you're aware, I didn't let you know, whenever I do look down, I'm looking down and taking notes. I
Yeah.
just didn't want you to think I was being rude.
No,
Um,
thank you, but I figured that's what you were doing.
so I just took this note and I really loved it. It was just off your statement. It was change your questions, change your answers. And I think that's really pertinent with how you deliver information. It is gonna impact how someone perceives it and ultimately how they I don't want to say reflect it, but how they answer, right? So a question I have based off of what you just said is you said that and sometimes that your in my words, your statements are misconstrued. And I believe what you called out was possibly that your tone was out of place. And I don't remember how you phrased it, but that those are my words. W- What do you do when something like that happens, when somebody calls attention to that, how do you redirect?
So, uh, I would say when I first started doing this, I was not as aware. So, since I've lost part of my hearing, I've lost half the hearing. So I've lost only got 50% hearing in my left ear. So, quite often I overcompensate when I'm speaking, sometimes depending on the room environment. And I will catch myself um, when I realize that the tone has changed or it's leveled up. When I start getting passionate about something, my voice will raise. And so I try to be a little bit more cautious about that. And actually, losing part of my hearing has made me, I think, probably more aware of that. I don't always catch it when I'm doing it, but I will, once I realize I'm doing it, then I will up and try and bring it back down. It's not always the easiest. And sometimes it takes me a little bit. Sometimes with the tone, when I'm talking with different faculty, the part of that is actually some of the feedback that I get from Trouvere is that I don't realize that my tone will change. Sometimes it's a very subtle kind of thing, and it's not even the level that I'm speaking at, but it's a sharpness to it that the tonality is affected. And you can hear sometimes it's perceived as sarcasm, sometimes it's conceived as criticism, sometimes it is, when I say that, when it gets that tone, it's usually perceived that it's negative.
Mm,
So if I catch myself and I'm doing that when I'm at work, then I have to provide I feel I have to provide at least a positive example then to show that it's not necessarily a negative or a positive per se, but that here is the difference between what I'm talking about, what you heard me say, and what it is that I need you to be aware of. So usually with them, it's a behavioral change. Um, so, for example, we were actually joking about this today. Um, because I asked a question about it. So in the summer, sleeves get rolled up. And one of the things that I am aware of as a civilian working in the military is that quite often they will be adjusting their sleeves because they're tight up here. That is considered a distraction or a mannerism. But because it's such a military thing, most people in the military environment don't notice that that occurs because the sleeves are supposed to be tight. They're supposed to
sure.
give that look, but comfortable enough.
Yeah.
So I have had instances in the past where I've had to bring it up because every minute somebody was doing this on both sides. It's like it was almost as if, well, just put your hands in your pockets, which you're not supposed to do, because to me, that's how it was striking me. And
Mm,
so it's not necessarily, I will emphasize that I want them to alleviate it entirely because I know it's part of their behavior system, but it's one of those you need to be aware of how often you're doing it and then back off from it because it can be perceived. If you don't have the students interested in what you're saying, then the mannerism is affecting how you're communicating to them. Does that make sense?
absolutely. Absolutely. That's I can think of many personal things that I've changed because of books I read that said I shouldn't. I'll just be honest, right? I didn't like come as an epiphany like on my own. But like for instance, sometimes if I'm sitting in a public space, I have a high level of social anxiety. And sometimes I'll start to tap my foot or jiggle my leg. And all that does personally, at least it makes it me feel that it just heightens my anxiety, it just raises my anxiety, it doesn't help my anxiety. And maybe this is my projection, but I feel that then people can visualize my anxiety more than likely, right? Because there's a physical representation. Um, and so this is something where I'm mindful to not do that as much. But it's funny that you said that, like, how there's certain mannerisms that are somehow like just accepted in various like groups, like like yours was specific to the military, but like I think of like the research group that I worked with, we were very tight knit, and a lot of us had social anxiety. And I remember watching like one person's legs start shaking, everybody's legs start shaking, and it was just like it was just okay, like that was what we did, right? Um, and I think that was part of the reason why it called attention to myself, is that I realized that I was doing it as much. Um,
So
nonetheless,
I'm sorry,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, okay, thank you. And the reason I asked about tone is because I too have struggled with that as well. And it's really interesting in how you framed it, because I've heard some of the same things, that I get sharp. Um, and I can't say that I've consciously, intentionally changed my tone, not that I know of at least, right? I know that I've intentionally raised my voice, and that's only usually when someone doesn't hear me. I learned a very long time ago raising your voice someone doesn't really help the conversation. Um, but I've struggled with that tone, and I think sometimes for me specifically, it tends to be mm, in kind of stressful moments, and it's just like I need this done right now. Like, I don't need questions. I don't need rebuttal. I don't need you, whatever. Just let's get it done. There's a deadline. There's a whatever. And I think that for me personally, that's when my tone gets out of check. Is when my stress level is a little higher. And then when there's like deadlines, I love deadlines, but at the same time,
Yeah,
no, I'm gonna say.
I was going to say um, my tone will usually change when um, probably when I think that I have been explicit in providing information, and then they're like, "What?" And
Mm,
so I may so it's almost a defense to it, and so I can understand that the tone would change, but it took quite a while, and having Trouvere help me recognize it, because a lot of times I don't recognize that I'm doing it. That's probably one of my biggest um, issues, is that I don't always recognize it. I'm better than I am, but that's part of the growing me. So, but one of the things I was going to share is that, for example, one of the reasons why I wear my hair back is that it's long, and I am one of those typical people that I will do that. And to me, that's a distracting mannerism that
mm,
people will focus on if you're talking with them. So if I know that I'm going to be in a place that I'm going to be speaking, I will deliberately pull it back so that that's one thing that I don't have to worry about. If it naturally falls forward, fine, then I'll move it out of the way if it's really bugging me. But I'm not constantly moving it out of the way. So there's sometimes there's little things like that when I have some of my faculty speaking, that they don't realize that they do. And that could be hand gestures, it could be the knife hand, um, various kinds of things, or they turn away from the students to look towards the screen and their voice drops down, which means
mm.
that all the students in the back, they can't hear the last part of what they're saying. So sometimes that's something that gets brought up in terms of their delivery. How are you providing all of your students that information? Because that's not always clear either.
That reminded me, I think almost every episode I bring up Modern Wisdom. It's one of my favorite podcasts. And I don't remember who the guest was, but the guest just did a study. Like most of his guests are somebody that's doing research or whatnot. And where and it's been a while, so I'm gonna regurgitate this very poorly. men communicate perpendicularly and women communicate parallel. And I don't remember if that was how it was framed, but essentially women talk face to face and men will talk shoulder to shoulder more often than not.
Hmm.
And
That's
after
interesting.
after I heard that, I'd watched. And I call them social experiments. I've even done it a few times to my friends, male friends specifically, and face them eye to eye, and more often than not, it tends to get uncomfortable, right? And without diving too much into it, I think some of that has to do with like evolution, right? When a man is face to face with a man, it tends to be more, at least hundreds of years ago, more of a combat situation, potentially, right?
Hmm. That's interesting. I had not heard it put like that before, but something that Trouvere and I came across back in the early 90s, right? Yeah, in the early 90s. We were listening to and reading at that point Deborah Tannen, and I was around the same time that John Gray had come out with his Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. And Deborah Tannen is she works in communication, and she was talking about the different ways that men and women communicate. And we read this passage, and it was men will minimize things. So, for example, if you say, "Oh, I was sick," a male friend may respond, "Oh, that's nothing. I was sick last week and I had 3 antibiotics that I had to take. You'll get over it."
Mm.
So they minimize what's going as opposed to empathizing, which the majority of women, a number of women, will tend to empathize. So, and if you say, "I'm sick," they'll say, "Oh, you were sick? I'm so sorry. Was there something you should have called me? I should have been able to help you. Maybe I had this or I could have done that." And they will try and make it better.
Mm.
So there's the difference between minimizing and the empathizing for it. And it was really funny because she also went on to say that it's it's kind of trait based. So it's not necessarily sex based, but the males typically would do that, and females at that time there wasn't all the emphasis that we have on the diversity now. And so it was interesting because then we started going through all of our different friends going, "Oh, he relates like a male, he relates like a male, oh, he relates like a female," and
Mhm.
doing the same thing with women friends that we knew. And it was interesting. And it actually, I had one female friend that I knew, and I always had a hard time being around her. And once I said, "Oh, she relates like a male," she minimizes everything that I say to her. But once I realized that, it was actually, oh, and I started responding to her in a different fashion because she wasn't empathizing. That was not how she was delivering the information. And it was a deliberate way of communicating. So we've kind of take that for some of the ways when we talk with people on how are they actually communicating the information. Are they minimizing it or are they empathizing with it? And not everybody falls into the same category all the time. Sometimes you do some things with different friends, but sometimes that helps us get a better handle on how we're responding to what they're talking about.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And I definitely like from my own personal experience, like my interactions with men and women for the last 40 years kind of falls in line with that. Um, Once again, not everybody's going to fit into that box, but there are stereotypes for a reason. There's always going to be outliers, but most of my male friends, I'm just going to be honest. If I want compassion, I don't normally call a male. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. At this point in life, I know that if Dustin is struggling or had a hard day at work and I want some compassion, I don't call one of my buddies. um, if I want motivation, I call one of my buddies. One of my buddies will be like, "Hey, Dustin, that's not that hard of a day. Remember last week or remember next month or whatever." Um, I think that's really valuable to know that. I think like the phrase now is know your audience, know who you're communicating with,
Mhm.
and ultimately, I think to some level, mm, I might step on my words here, but we should tailor our communication to the people that we're communicating with, right? I don't think that we should mm, not be ourselves. I don't really know how to, like I said, I know I was going to step on my words here. I just, I think that, when I communicate with women, specifically women that are empathetic, right? I know how to communicate with them. And if I wanted that motivation, then I'm going to call a woman that's not necessarily empathetic, or I'm going to call a man, right? And for me, like to bring this full circle, I've been disappointed because I contacted my buddy and I wanted some compassion from him, but he didn't offer me compassion, right? And somehow I was let down or whatever, even though this is a good friend, he's always, but because I didn't get the kind of communication that I needed, I went to the wrong place, right? Nonetheless, I'll get off my little mini soapbox there.
No, that's perfectly understandable. Trouvere and I have come to the point where we were having a conversation probably about 20 years ago or so. Sometimes it's hard to remember. They run together. But I was flat out complaining about something, and I'm probably it was either school or it was work. I don't remember which. And he stopped me and he said, "What do you want before you go any further? Do you want a solution or do you want me
Mm.
to listen?" And I said, and I had to pause and think about what it was that I wanted from the conversation, because I had not started that with anything in mind when originally I had started out. I just was word mouth, the word vomit, as it were, on just getting it all out. And so a lot of times I will think beforehand when we have some of those conversations. Do I want a solution or do I want him to just listen? And I'll tell him then up front so he doesn't have to ask anymore. I will just say, you know what? I don't need a solution. I just want you to hear me because I can't talk to anybody else at the moment. So if you could just listen, and he can do that. There have been times though when I have asked specifically for, you know what, I know there's several options, but I can't necessarily see the clarity of all of them. Let me give you this, and you give me a solution. Now, have I always gone with the solution? No, but sometimes it puts me back on the path that I need to be able to focus more on what I'm looking for that clarity, because it's a different perspective.
That I came to a similar like revelation years ago when communicating with my partner. Specifically I date women, and I found out, and once again, like, I don't want to get too lost into like stereotypes of gender, but there is some value to it. Um and more often than not, like I said, when I talk to my friends that are men, like, oh, I got a problem, we're gonna solve it, right? I don't think, personally, I'm not a woman, but just based off my experience, a lot of times women want a solution, they just want an ear. And if I want to like be more elegant about it, they want support. And how that support is going to look to them is going to look dramatically different to me. Because if you come to me and you're like, made up name Bobby is such a butthead at work, I'm like, well, why is he butthead? What did he do? Like, can you avoid him? Can you, like, is he violating some HR policy? Blah, 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 blah. Whereas you just might want to vent. And it's been very important for me, um, to be a healthy partner, to ask my person, what do you need from me right now? Do you want a solution? Do you want to have a conversation? Or do you just want me to sit here in silence and support you? right? And that alone has helped tremendously because so often I'm like, my LinkedIn profile says my job title is problem solver extraordinaire. And I've stuck by that title my whole career because that's what I do. I built a professional career in solving problems. Um, but often it's not a problem and it doesn't need a solution. It goes back to like kind of circling way back to like one of your statements was that women are empathetic. And I think a lot of times when women approach their person or their partner, their husband, their boyfriend, um, that they want some of that empathy back, right? They don't want that minimization. They don't want the solution. Hmm. Some good thoughts spin in my head right now. Thank you. I
Okay, you're
appreciate it.
welcome.
Um, there's a couple comments in the chat, and one of them was, when we were talking about like know your audience and change your demographic, and that's kind of what they're saying is that he's like, it's basically like marketing to different demographics. You're selling the same product, but you tailor the message to the type of the customer that you're dealing with. I like that so much because so much of this is like business, entrepreneur, and a lot of my flavor of authority is like the like CEO, COO type of situation like Dr. Bob has talked about or Kevin and Katie talk about often. Um
Yeah, see, that's what when we first got past the kink and we're getting more into where we're at now, we were actually under Kevin and Katie, and we were doing the executive and the CEO. And
I
then it was
love
kind of like we've gone through several different variations, but we're still always been a military style.
her. Yeah, they used to be local 10, 12 years ago ish to
Now
Central
there
Ohio
are
area.
years.
Yeah, they've been RVers now for quite some time. The same
Yeah,
with like Dan and Dawn
yeah.
as well. It was really crazy. Um, I don't know the I don't want to put any individual on a pedestal, but there was a wealth of experience in Central Ohio when I first moved here, and it was very humbling, very very humbling. But nonetheless, here we are,
Yep.
30 some minutes into the conversation. I haven't even asked you one of my questions yet. So why don't we do that? But with that said, just like, I stated, it's going to be a conversation. And for me personally, I found a lot of value in what we just talked about. And, hopefully the audience did. If not, eh, I'm sorry. I don't know. No, I'm not sorry. That's like a trauma response, but here we are. So my first question that I have are what are some common methods of communications used by submissives to express their obedience and submission to their dominant partner?
What's that? See, that's the smartass answer. Um, well, for me, it part of that depends, I suppose, on what's occurring. Are you talking verbal? Are you talking gestures for like when we're playing or what?
Day-to-day conversation. And in
Oh,
my opinion, communication isn't just verbal. There's so many layers of communication. Like what we were talking about, like tone is a layer of conversation. Body language, I mean, even posture. I mean, which falls under body language, but posture is big for me. That
so my mind just went, can you repeat actually what you want me to answer?
so, what are some ways that you communicate with your dominant partner that it shows your obedience and shows your submission? Going back, how about let's make it really tricky.
Okay.
When you stated earlier, when you believe you deliver information explicitly, but they didn't quite get it, right? So following up, if you communicated with your person information and you were explicit about it, and now you feel your tone or your reactive state is coming up. How do you redeliver that information? What methods do you take to make sure that you deliver that information respectfully to your person?
So we've gotten more to the point where when, say, for example, Trouvere has given me a task and there's minimal information in it, I am limited to how many clarifying things that I can ask. So I have to be very mindful about what it is that I actually need in order to determine what he wants in less than, say, 3 clarifying statements. And yes, that's a specific number, because at one point there was a number of times where it was like, well, what about this, or what about this, or, and there was a number of things like that, and it was finally, I probably fed him up, and he said, you know what, I want you to do a number of these things. If I want you to do it specific, I will provide you that information and tell you how to do it. And that's how I want it done. If I give you something generic, unless you need the information in order to get it accomplished, just get it done.
Mm,
So in some instances, part of the clarity for it may be if I've asked something and I got the answer, but I asked the wrong question because it didn't answer maybe what I was thinking. So then I have to stop and I have to rethink, what is it that I'm actually trying to get? So to have to limit it to 3, sometimes that's really difficult, because once that's asked, then I'm done. I get to go do it, and then the task will be completed, and it's either how he wanted it, or if it wasn't, then we will have a discussion as he's telling me what I should have done instead. And we have had some of those. And from that, I will make notes, take mental notes, so that that doesn't occur in the future. So, for example, one of the things that we do for our military lifestyle is that I will do letters of intent, LOIs, and that's sort of like, here's blast, and he will put, here's commander's intent. So I get about a paragraph on, this is what we're going to be doing. We're going to be going to this conference and blah, 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 blah. And I have to put it in the format to indicate and fill out all of the information. So then he can look at that. So, for example, as part of that information, that includes the weather. So if we have to consider, if we are, say, not example, in the host hotel, we're in a different hotel. So we have to think about walking from one hotel to the next. That could take different shoes, and that's
mm,
a learning experience. Having the wrong shoes because I wasn't thinking that far ahead makes a big difference. I'm sorry.
oh, I accidentally pressed the thing on and made noise on my computer.
Oh, okay. So having the right shoes, having adequate weather gear, say for example, because it was going to rain, and
Mm,
but we brought raincoats, so we have done that. But all of these things are outlined in the LOI. And then after any time that we have an event, we do an after action. So say, for example, we wanted to do something different. We wanted to wear a different outfit. We had the wrong intent for something on what we thought we were going to accomplish. And this is how we need to change it when we go to something else again. That gets put in, and we do an after action.
mm. I like s- part of what you said is like when you get generalized and like a generalized order. At least once again, that's my words, and I think about that often. Oh, like how I deliver an order, and so I think about a conversation I had with Dr. Bob quite a few years ago, and he was talking about cleaning a car, if that was an order, right? What do you mean? Clean the car? Just the outside, the inside? Do you want me to detail it? Do you want me to clean the engine bay? Do you want me to scrub the exhaust tip? Right? Like, depending, like, for instance, how you clean my car and how you clean my truck are different. As weird as that is, they're different, right? Um, but I think about that sometimes, like that generalized information. I just want the task done. I don't need 40 follow up. Just wash the dishes. It doesn't, if I wanted you to dry the dishes and put them up, I would have given that information, right? I may have to adopt that 3 question follow up because I personally have had somebody who asked a lot of follow-up questions to the point where I almost thought it was like they're being intentional about it, um, and disrespectful. And I don't personally believe that's the truth, but that was how I perceived it.
And I'm sorry, I was giggling because he's making faces at me off to the side
No,
as, yes, that's exactly what that is.
and it was hard because I perceived it as disrespect, whereas they were just trying to make sure that they served me well.
Right. It was, for me, it was clarifying. And
Mhm.
it got to the point where, no, you haven't, as far as he was concerned, he had enough information that he gave me, just get it done, unless he had something specific. And then it was fine, go ahead and do the task. And then if it wasn't done how he had envisioned, or then he would take responsibility and say, nope, I didn't give you enough information, obviously. So let's take
Mm.
that and see how I can frame it differently the next time I give you something. And we moved on from there.
I appreciate how, for lack of better terminology, how interactive you are with the relationship. And when Trouvere realized that he didn't deliver the information correctly, he made the decision to deliver the information differently the next time, or at least I assume so based off of what you just stated. And I think that goes back into some of the conversations we had off air, where it doesn't matter where you are inside of the BDSM community, everybody can miscommunicate and everybody can communicate better. Everybody can communicate better. I don't care
Everybody.
how good. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. We are always working on that. Matter of fact, there, I will share this because I've shared it before in some of our classes that we do. Um, uh, there would be times when he would be telling me something and it would, I don't want to say it triggered me, but it would bring up feelings from the past.
Mm.
And I couldn't necessarily isolate what I was feeling in regards to what it was he was telling me. So we came up with a phrase that when I got to that point and I recognized that, I would just say, you know what, I'm full. Because I
Mm.
couldn't separate what he was telling me and process it as new information in order to be able to complete what he wanted me to do, or even to think about and focus on what's the real issue here. And I'm making it sound simple, but this took a long time to get to that point. Very seldom now do I think that I will say I'm full, but there were instances in the past where it was like we would start something and it'd be like, "Yep, I'm full. I'm full," because I could not differentiate what it was with the feelings and everything associated with it, and I had to. And so, yes, we determined you have X amount of time to think about that. Sometimes it was, 15, 20 minutes. Sometimes it was the next day. But we did put limits on how soon I needed to actually respond to what the initial um, thing we were talking about, or the initial task or whatever. Once I isolated it, and we would start off with, okay, this is what I was focusing on. This is what I need to focus on. So, to some instances, it was mislabeled feelings. Some things it was, I was bringing up past aspects and they were all tied together, and I had to separate them because it's like, that doesn't actually have anything to do with now and what he's asked me. It could be a simple task, but for a number of things, it would just, everything would mesh and it would bring up all of this stuff. And so I had to learn how to isolate that.
Oh, I might borrow that one too. The I'm full.
I'm full. Yep. I'm full.
I can see myself using it occasionally, not often. Um, but to be honest, I can see the people around me using it, and I I'm a force to be reckoned with, and especially when I get hyper fixated on whatever project I am, and I can deliver a lot of information really fast to people, and it usually leads to problems. Um, it goes back to that's one of those moments where I don't know if it's my stress. Maybe that's not the good word, but in those moments that I'm speaking, that's where my tone, I struggle with it again, right? Because I'm like, all right, let's get this. All right, give me this, and like the person doesn't even have a list and piece of paper to like write it down, um, or whatever else I've already given them. I think that while it's a simple concept, I think applying the concept to your relationship is takes a lot of effort. Um, and I mean, I'm sitting here trying to process that. Like, if I was talking to my person and they're like, "I'm full," I didn't tell you were full. I was like, "Wait, no." But at the same time, like, I can see the value in giving my person the authority to express that, right?
Right. So I was going to say it's interesting that we're talking about that, and the different ways that things will come across. For example, there was a staff development today, and a video clip was used of what was. It was told to the students that it was a lecture, and they were supposed to rate the person delivering the information. And afterwards, I talked with the person who was giving the class, and I had said, you know, you need to use a different video because your video doesn't actually show a similar situation here in this classroom environment. What you actually showed was you showed a business demonstration. And he was like, how do you know that? And I said, so for one, it got brought up about the rate that the person was talking. And I said, if you look at that and the pattern on how the phrases were being done, um, and the person was very, like, just like I am right now, not looking at the camera, but they weren't, it appeared they weren't looking at the students. So there was a lack of what everybody in the room thought was lack of eye contact. And it, and there was other different similar kinds of things that were occurring in this video clip. And I said, no. And I started pointing out the different things, including that the rate of speech, which in my personal opinion, I have found that when business demonstrations or presentations are usually given, that they will talk at a faster rate than what may be acceptable in a classroom situation. So I said, so to show that video and say that it's a class, it's not, it's a demonstration. They had a specific purpose for what they were doing. It was not to necessarily impart knowledge like you would do in a classroom environment. And so we had a discussion back and forth, and in terms of what would be more appropriate for if he wanted feedback for that, that he needed to get, because to me that was a different audience for that video, and that wasn't the audience that needed to go to. So I think sometimes that um, things like that, when we go in with certain expectations of what we think we're going to see, but it's actually designed for a different person to talk to or a different audience, then because your expectations are like, wait, that's not what I was expecting, you already have a bias towards what's going to happen.
Mm. That's interesting. I mean, when you think about your bias and like not even just that, but like I think even past that, like the placebo effect, right? And it's like if you go into a situation thinking that something's going to be negative, it's more than likely going to be negative. It was interesting to hear that, and just I'm going to ask a clarifying question. Um, so if I understood that correctly, like when someone is doing a demonstration or a presentation, they communicate faster than if they were in like an in-person educational scenario.
In my experience, because the intent is different, so quite often I have seen that for, like, especially business presentations, the rate of speech usually tends to be faster than what you might hear, like even within a lecture hall and a professor delivering the material. They're more likely to talk and toss an awful lot of things at you, but the rate of what they're tossing at you is not necessarily the same.
Hmm. What do you think the reasoning for that is?
In some, that's a good question. In the business world, I would say because they are more time driven to a certain extent. So they have more limited time availability. And if they have a lot of material that they have to put within that time, then they're going to shove it in there as fast as they possibly can, because then you have an opportunity. If somebody has a question, they can ask a question. In the classroom, I think that they have a lot of material, but you know that there's always going to probably be another session, another class session, till you know that the semester has ended, in which an opportunity may come where you can maybe tie something else in if you didn't always cover it in that aspect, or you can assign it as here's a pre-read. It's much easier to do that, I think, in an academic environment. And I don't know that that always translates into everyday relationships, but I know one of the things that we end up doing is that he reads much faster than I do, so I do get homework on occasion, and he will give me, because he makes little notes and things like that on some of the books that he reads, and so then my task is to read what he's written as well as the material, and then we have an opportunity to discuss it. And sometimes it's phrases that may resonate. Sometimes it's the situations. Hey, what about this? Talked about that. And it came across in a book. It was used as an example. Or it's a new concept. Or I mean, fill in the blank. But he's used that in a number of he's used that for quite a while now for a number of books. I will always be behind because I can't keep up. So I can only do the best that I can and read so fast. But we do have a lot of conversations about a lot of things. And that's one reason why we are pretty specific on like a lot of the verbiage that we will utilize with each other, or things that we pick or don't pick.
Mm. Yeah, I I've read a decent amount on like delivering information and how to deliver information. For me, I have actually slowed down my communication in most situations across the board. it seems that a lot of people suggest that that's the path, that a lot of times we're afraid of silence, that we must fill it with some words, and we don't take the time to fill it with good words, right? So it's interesting to hear that, like, in different scenarios, some people are going to be motivated to deliver that information faster. Um, because, like, for me, I've spent a lot of my adult life to try to slow down how, but maybe that's just because have you ever seen the old movie Short Circuit, Johnny Five,
Yes.
the
Yes.
robot? That's me. Like, need more input, like, and I can be overwhelming. Um, very much so.
It can be. And I know one of the things I will provide as feedback for some of my faculty is that um, quite often when they are asking a question and they want an answer from students, they will give less than 5 seconds of silence before they will start then on either rephrasing the question or starting to answer it themselves so that it becomes a rhetorical question. And I will sometimes lead them through exercises on, no, let's pull out the little stopwatch here. I want you to go 10 seconds. And they think it's an eternity to wait for a response. So I find that interesting that you bring up about the silence aspect.
Think, like, that's got me thinking, right? So if I ask you a question, 10 seconds, geez, that's a long time to wait for a response.
But if you really want a heartfelt answer rather than just off the top of their head,
Mhm.
um, that's that might be wrong, but you want them to either provide an insight or their thinking process for if I mean if especially how open ended the question might be. So if you're looking for something from that student, then you have to allow them the opportunity to think about, well, how am I going to phrase this before they open their mouth and just spew it out, in my opinion.
No, no, I completely agree with you, but I'm sitting here thinking, like, "Hmm, man, I might need that stopwatch," because when I ask somebody a question, whether it's personal or professional, if after 2.3 seconds, I don't get a response, I'm probably gonna ask if you heard me, or I'm gonna repeat my question. To wait a full 10 seconds seems a little extreme, but at the same time, if I want a genuine answer, especially if it's a complex question, it might take more than 10 seconds. It might take 10 minutes, right?
Right.
And I know for me personally, when I've asked those complex questions, I've set a time frame on them. Like, "Hey, I got this tough question that I wanna ask you. I don't expect an answer now. If But, tomorrow, let's talk about it. And before we talk about it, I'd like you to make some notes about the conversation topics, right?" Um, but when it's just like in my head, what I perceive as a simple question, if it's not like an immediate response, it's like, did this person listen to me? Are they paying attention to me? And I think that boils down to, if I'm just going to throw myself under the bus, it's probably insecurity or projection, right?
Uh, it could be that, but I'm going to ask you a question now. Since
Yeah.
why would you ask those questions? Are they listening to me? Why? There are times when I would think that it would be more beneficial on, do I need to rephrase the question?
Mm.
How should I rephrase it? As opposed to putting the onus on you, it could be on them.
Mm.
So there's a number of times that we spend talking about questioning techniques and how they're phrased. I have some faculty that will ask either polling questions or close-ended questions where, and quite often they will ask things and I'll just go, nope. And they'll look at me like, what? And I go, that's what you just asked me. I said, what is it that you really want to know? Because usually it's their follow-up question then. And I said, if you want to make a polling question, how many of the class have done X? Okay, fine. Then you get a better sense of where you're going. But then you need something that's going to get to the root of what it is that you want them to actually answer and or understand. So you have to be, in my opinion, you have to be more cautious when you phrase your things like that and have that follow-up question. Do you want it as a follow-up question, or do you want it as a strong primary question when you're first asking that?
Well, I just to be clear, the questions, that's more like I said, internally, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we can talk about like I've started to do some of the work, and I still need to address a lot of work. But as a child, like I wasn't heard, my voice was never heard, right? Um, or at least that's my perception, right? Um, Nonetheless, like that's why I I don't know. I think that silence is it makes me nervous, or the thought of the silence makes me nervous. Um, Personally, I can't honestly say I can think of any experience where like I had my person, an S type, that genuinely just wasn't paying attention. Like, just they're probably not going to be in a relationship with me if they're not paying attention to me, right? But
Right.
when it comes to that pause, and that it's weird that I thought of that, because like I said, I can't think off the top of my head of any situation where I had my S type like make me feel that they weren't actually listening to me. They may not have heard me, right? But not that they were like actually not listening. Um, I don't know. I think I got some more things to look there, because going back to like what I'm bringing into that conversation, if I came into that conversation potentially thinking that someone might not listen to me or might not receive that information, then I imagine somehow my words are going to convey that information, or maybe my tone, or maybe my body language. Hmm. Some thoughts. I know I'm getting warm over here. Oh, if I can get my button undone. I do have a funny comment. It's a little old, but when we were talking about the follow-up question, someone said that their and their sir were laughing so hard because their middle name is I have some follow-up questions. I thought that was pretty comical.
That is funny.
So to get back on track, I think I'm gonna have to add uh-oh, I went on to focus. Lovely camera. Well, I guess you'll just have to deal with it non-focus until it wants to focus.
I don't know.
Yep, technology.
That'll work.
Um Nonetheless, so I want to add like a little um pre-information to this question. I have no idea why I won't focus again. Um so a lot of times, at least for me, I look as communication as a service, right? It's a voice. An S type's voice is a service to me. And someone some time ago not so elegantly put it, was that if this is your toy, you need the instruction manual. And who's better to write the instruction manual than your toy, right? So, with that information, some elegant, some not, how does the concept of service factor into the communication between a submissive and their dominant partner?
Well, it's not like you asked the easy questions.
Well, no, of course not.
So, I mean, that for us, that figures into a lot of different things because we're always talking about everything, it seems. Um, so I mean, so for us, both of our number one language is the love language out of five languages. So quite often, just sitting there holding each other's hand is a way for us for communicating, and that's sometimes I think it's just even that simple thing is just a service for both of us for refilling our souls to be able to communicate on a better level.
May I ask, do you start your conversations with that sometimes to help like bring that connection and remind you each other of your roles to each other?
Well, one of the things, for example, that we do when I come home from work is we will put our foreheads together and put our arms over each other and breathe.
Mm.
And part of that is the switch from after I've told my day and he's told his day that we are now in the headspace to work with each other. So we will breathe for and just touch each other in that fashion for a couple of minutes, which is always interesting because he breathes much slower than I do. He has a
So do
much
you match
slower.
your breath?
I don't try to match his breath. I just try to breathe. um,
Fair.
I think I'm not sure if he actually tries to match my breath or not, but part of it is just to we'll smell each other. Let's taking those deeper breaths, taking in that essence, just reaffirming we're back home, we're back where we both need to be, and it's with each other. And then
I can feel you slow down.
he can feel me slow down, he said. So, so, so yes, it is a different rate for like when I'm at work and stuff like that. So I come home and it is very much a shift. And then we continue our ritual, which I'll pass on. Uh, so we continue our coming home ritual, and then we go from there. So I mean, but that's one way that the submission is a service to each other because we get back from we were both working and now we're not. So we're back in the same environment and we're back in the same headspace. Does
I think
that
that's important. No,
does
that
that
makes a
answer
lot
your
of sense.
question? No, I was going to say, does that answer your question? I was thinking, I don't know if I answered all of the question.
Uh, I mean, at the end of the day, the questions, there's no right or wrong answer. It's based off of your opinion and your experience. And I think absolutely, like it answered the question because in my head, part of service is connection, right? A lot of what we're doing is, at least in my opinion, and my flavor of this, is to establish deeper connection. And sometimes it's as simple as holding a hand. It's funny that you bring that up because throughout this conversation, I realized that, and actually, when I interviewed Trouvere, I realized there's more and more parallels. I mean, there's some differences, definitely. Um, but I'm very specific with my person. They hold a specific hand, right? And they are always there. And even if they're not there, nobody's ever in their place, right? Um, and that is like a subtle way for me and my person to communicate. And that's like I said, I can be at an event and it doesn't matter. That space is saved for my person, whether they're there, whether they're not. in my head of they might walk in the room in 5 minutes and they need to have their place where they belong, right? Um, and I think like to elaborate on some of my harsher statements, like a toy's instructions, for me, a submissive's voice is mm, I don't want to elevate it, but it's definitely one of the higher forms of service that an S type can offer me. I need that information. There's something that I've said often in professional life. It doesn't take time to make good decisions. It takes information. So the more information I have, the better decisions I can make. Now there is some caveats. Sometimes you need some time for this, that, or the other, but for the most part, you need more information more than you need more time. And I think going back, circling way, way back to where I said that, like, in order to be a good partner, you learn from your previous partners. And more so, you learn as you're working with your current partner through communication. And if your person doesn't feel that they're safe to communicate with you, then it's probably a recipe for disaster, in my opinion. I feel like I'm going way off tangent here, but at the end of the day, for me specifically, communication is essential. I can't do the nonverbal. I actually have joked around somewhat facetiously, like, if you don't talk to me for a whole day, that's a no call, no show, you're fired. Right. And like, I really haven't had those situations, but at the same time, like, I thrive in communication. I mean, probably part of the reason why I started the podcast. Nonetheless, we will continue on because we're, over an hour in and we're only on the third question. So I'm gonna do better than I did with Trouvere, and I'm at least get three questions asked. So my next question for you is, how do nonverbal cues play a role in the communication between a submissive and their dominant partner?
Well, for us, we have some things that are nonverbal, but I mean, everybody's going to be different. But I mean, I could do a come hither look, and he's going to know what I mean. Um, for when we first started our journey, there was a lot more eye rolling on my part. So I had to get past that, in terms of, because it would be like, that's silly. Why are you wanted to do that? Now, in some instances, there's a better understanding of where he's coming from, and he wants it. That's bottom line. That's fine. Then let me please him. So, but I can see that, like, when those first started, that would make a difference on how we would interact with each other. I know when we first started talking with each other in terms of what things we might want to try, or me being more adventurous in some of our play, he bought me a little pair. It's their little handcuffs, and they're linked together, so that I didn't necessarily have to say anything, but I could give him those so that he knew, here's what I want. And then we had already talked about beforehand what that could include. And there were times when he would ask me, and times when he would just decide. So I know what's included in all of that we discussed. So here we're going to go. We've also done, I think, a lot of I don't want to just say it's looks, but a lot of times it is just the looks. You get to a certain point, I think, where you understand what that entails. part of that is just because we've been so together for so long. But I mean, there's other instances like with some of our play with where we had to come up with ways like holding a ball or a scarf so that I could drop it because I might not be able to say anything. Either because I may have a gag, or I'm tied up, or I'm so overwhelmed by what I'm feeling that I would forget words. So sometimes it was just easier if I say, for example, I dropped the ball that I was holding, and then he could say, "Is that a yellow? Is that a red?" And he could help supply it for me. And more often than not, it was just a yellow. I needed to pause. But in some instances, it was not. But I couldn't function enough to be able to express it. So I think in some instances, it depends on the situation that you're talking about, on the nonverbal aspects of it.
I think you brought up a big one, like the eye rolling, right? I think a lot of people do that and they don't even realize they do it. And I don't know if you've seen the change of expression when you even brought that up, but I felt it, right? I'm like, oh, I hate when people roll their eyes at me. I just hate it. And my word is I feel like they're bulking, like they're just like, they're resistant. And I'm not one to force dominance, right? I'm not one to force you to kneel, so to say. You're gonna ask me to kneel before I'm gonna tell you to kneel, kind of is my flavor. And when I think about someone rolling their eyes, it's just like, oh. But at the same time, I think that going back to like your term of mannerisms, I think sometimes we do a lot of these things subconsciously and we don't even realize that we're doing. I had a long conversation with a gentleman by the name of Soul Hunter. He's kind of been somewhat of a mentor to me for many years. And it was about unconscious resistance to authority. And I would think that like some of that falls under that. But to not get too off topic, I want to bring up one of my things when it comes to nonverbal cues that play into communication. And this has worked very well for me specifically. I like positions. They're kind of hot and they serve a purpose. And one of them specifically is humble. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but essentially you're kneeling, head down, hands in front of your head, right? Almost as a submissive physical expression as a body probably could get in, other than like rolling over and exposing your belly, similar to like a cat or something, right? But how I utilize humble is if either you think I'm upset with you or you're upset with me and words cannot convey that, you can go to humble. If I am, and I think about this, like part of the why I implemented this is I'll throw myself under the bus. A lot of my rules are actually to protect my person from me. And going back to I'm a force, good, bad, and ugly. And I think of like that lion, and I'm just like, roar, right? Like I'm roaring on the savannah, and I want everybody to know that I'm the fucking king or whatever. Nonetheless, when you think about those scenarios, if it's a lion and a lion fighting, and the one roars louder, it doesn't kill the other one. What does the other one do? It bows, it exposes its belly, and it admits that it is submissive to that lion. And that's exactly how I think of the humble. Now, I don't really think that I ever roar at my partners. To say that I've never been upset with my partner would be a lie completely. More so, I've realized at this point in life, I'm almost never I won't use the word never, but I'm almost never upset with a person. I'm upset with a process or a product. Now, that person may have been involved in it, but I'm usually never upset with that person. And if I'm in that moment of stress and I'm, roaring, or it's perceived that I am roaring, they have that ability to go to humble. For me, if I was roaring, now I have no more reason to. They've shown. And for me specifically, like, it's a big psychological click, or in my head, like, wait a second, I wasn't even roaring. Like, why do they think what did I communicate, or what did I convey that makes them think I'm upset with them? Or what did I convey or communicate with them that causes them to be upset with me? Or I guess there's always a third, what are they upset about outside of the dynamic that they need to discuss? Nonetheless, for me personally, that's been pretty useful, right? It's not often that it's needed. Like I said, I personally don't, at least from my perspective, don't feel like that I roar at people much. I don't, like I said, I don't really yell. I try not to get upset. It doesn't really add value to my life. But nonetheless, going back to like that change of tone, I've had a partner use that as a way to signal, hey, your tone just changed, right? Um, Nonetheless, so I will get off my little soapbox.
I don't know. I kind of like your soapboxes. I find them interesting.
It's a new perspective, right? It's a new
Yeah.
thought. Um, and that's where one of the big motivations for me to start this podcast was, I just want to hear these conversations. To be part of them is pretty cool, but I really want to hear some of these conversations and some of these new thoughts and new ideas. That's more, once again, not trying to elevate, but more intellectual than just physical based. A lot of the education that I see in our community is mainly skill based, hard skill to be specific, and not soft skill. And I would love to see more soft skills being taught. Um, and another thing I'd love to see taught is first aid. Why don't we teach first aid in our community? But
Good question. I don't know.
I mean, I personally think every responsible adult should be first aid certified and CPR certified. If you're not, you can go to your local Red Cross and it's free, usually, not always. And if it's not free, it's really cheap and it can like possibly save a loved one. So kind of fitting. But nonetheless, that's a complete different topic.
So I have a
Um,
question, because you use the phrase soft skills, that we don't teach soft skills. Why do we call them soft skills? Why aren't they just skills? Why aren't they social skills?
um, that's language that I picked up from professional life.
Right.
And
And I mean, it's not like that's the only time I've ever heard it, but that's just one of those things that I've wondered about myself, is why do we isolate them and call them soft skills as if they are not in the forefront? Because quite often they are actually more important to our well-being in how we actually communicate with each other or getting anything done. And yet, to me, soft skills sounds like it's something that's cushy, that's not
mm,
necessary. It's a accoutrement that makes it easier, as opposed to something that's vital that you need.
I agree. I definitely agree that like the term soft kind of diminishes the importance of it. Um, Also, something that you hit on is division, and I talk about this a lot. Is divided we fall, and if we're gonna divide like skills, it's no different than dividing race or gender or anything else. So probably not going to be a phrase I use anymore. Thank you. But no, I mean, there's skills that I personally I feel that there's some lacking inside of the community there, and it I get it. Everybody wants to be flogged or tied or so on and so forth. But in all of those situations, in my head at least, the commonality on every single thing that we do is communication. Like, not just BDSM, but like everything in life is fundamentally how well we can communicate with other people around us, and it impacts on so many facets.
I agree.
So no more soft skills, just skills.
No more
I want
just
all the skills.
skills.
Just
That's
skills.
right. Just
I like-
skills.
Let's see, where do we want to jump? Because we got about 30 minutes at most. I know I'm tired. I know you said you were a little bit tired. How about this? This is a really good one. I think this is an important one to ask. Can you provide some examples of how a submissive might express their desires, their needs, or their limits to their dominant partner? I'll add the caveat while being respectful of the dynamic.
Well, that's a really good question. Not everything will work for everybody, but I know for us, we've done a number of different things. So I've done writing in the journals. I've done writing assignments. We've done creating stories for each other and then reading them. So it may be a fantasy that we want. It could be just something that interests us. I feel like I'm not answering what you asked me.
Not quite. I did like you writing stories. I do think that is a way, or that is part of an answer to the question, in a way on how a submissive might express her desires. But that gives me a follow-up question.
So for example, I have a current task in hand. There's actually 6 parts to it. Only one has currently been accomplished, but we use Evernote for communicating. And so like in there for the stories, this is what made me think about it, is that I have to write something that we've actually done that I might like to repeat, a fantasy that we may or may not do. I'm trying to remember him and I can't remember him. He's not even looking at me today. Any help? One is if we were going to have a third in there, a threesome. But there's six ones that he's.
Something we did together that you liked.
Oh, something that we did together that I liked.
A fantasy involving the 2 of us.
A fantasy involving the 2 of us. I'm sorry, he's reading them to me.
You and another woman.
Me and another woman, and what?
1 vanilla, 1 kinky.
1 vanilla and 1 kinky.
Fantasy threesome.
A fantasy threesome.
And an interlude in a favorite setting.
And an interlude in a favorite setting.
And the one you wrote is 1,000 words short. So.
What?
It's like 500 words.
Are you kidding?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. He apparently counted my word count because he told me I had to write at least 1,500 words, and I was short. So I am surprised that it was that short. So okay, I thought it meant word count, but okay. So apparently I have not completed the task yet, and I have to go back and finish that one. So so he will give me timelines on when they all need to be done, so they get scattered around. In some instances, then we'll go back and so what did you like about this one? What did you not like about that one? And we will use it as a jumping off point. We've also done for communicating. So he likes feet massages. So quite often I will massage his feet and give him massages like that. We both do reading of erotica, me more so than him. Sometimes, and this is hard for me, actually, you would not think, but it is, to read the stories aloud. But then we'll break it apart and we'll talk about, like what I liked about it or what I didn't. I like it better when he makes up the stories.
Or, well, I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe it's safer when he offers suggestion than if you offer suggestion.
Yeah, it may be safer. I mean,
Safe's a big word, to be clear.
yeah, but safe is a relative term. So I mean, in that particular instance, if he makes a suggestion, it's not going to be something that's out of the park that he could be, oh my God, you want to do what? As opposed to, oh, he made the suggestion, and in a lot of instances, it's things that we may have talked about before, and we're just continuing on with that conversation.
And it's not asking me what you want.
And it's not asking me what I want. Yes, that's true. So yes, as I said in the beginning, I find it much easier to say what I don't want as opposed to what I do want. Even still, it's still a harder thing for me to do. So we're working on it. It's a work in progress.
Well, and I can only speak for my personal relationships, and myself, obviously. But my experience with a lot of submissives is they need that hand holding. They need a little bit of guidance. Sometimes they even need a little bit of a push. I think for various reasons, humans of all flavor carry shame for different reasons. And submissive, if we're going to speak to submissive, I'm not a submissive. I've never identified as a submissive. But I could speculate that there may be some shame felt that if a submissive says, I want this, because culture says that submissives, it's not supposed to be about what you want, right? It's supposed to be about what the dominant wants. Not quite. Not for a long-term healthy relationship, in my opinion. If the dominant is only getting what he wants, I don't think personally that is grounds for a long-term healthy relationship personally. And I think that there is some shame when, I mean, let's just be honest, we have a term for it, topping from the bottom, or a phrase, right?
Yep.
So I can't be too far off here when we have phrases that are readily used inside of the community that kind of shame submissives for expressing wants, needs, or desires. I think for me personally, that's why I've been so adamant in your voice is a service to me, right? It's your responsibility. And it's funny you brought up the feet, the parallels. And we're going to connect these real quick. So a few years back, 4 or 5, 6 years ago, I owned a wonderful human by the name of Rachel. And she always used to try to touch my feet. And I was like, don't touch my feet. Like, why you touch my feet? And partly because, like, prior to that, I was like, feet are dirty, nobody touches feet, blah, 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 whatever. All the cultural, societal baggage. And then more so, I thought she was doing it because that was part of her service to a previous master, and that I didn't like at all. I'm like, wait, no, I get to pick what kind of service I want. And after like, we were probably 6 months in to our relationships, maybe even 9 months, and she would just try to massage my feet, like, and it started to actually upset me to the point where like we need to have a talk. And I'm thankful I had that talk with her. And I'm not going to divulge all the information, but essentially what she said was, "Sir, I know how far your feet have taken you. I know how far your feet are going to take you or continue to take you. And I know that you don't really take care of them and nobody else does." And it was just like this heart filled thing. And I'm just like, oh, please rub my feet now. Like, please rub my feet now, because it was wholesome. It wasn't, I'm not, like I said, I would, and even till this day, I would not force someone to rub my feet. Like, I like the enthusiasm behind it. But if it wasn't for, I mean, to be honest, like I said, I thought it was like a disservice. I thought she was just trying to serve me in a way that she served another. And then when she expressed her desires and expressed her reasoning behind it, it was like, okay, yep, I'm into this. And I was really into it for a long time, and I still kind of am with the right people, right? Um, and I think, at least for me, I play. I don't know if there's like a new role, but we need to make another role on FetLife. Like, I'm a reaction dom,
A
because
reaction
I
dom.
I very much enjoy playing off of another person's reaction.
Ah,
Um,
I got a thumbs up
yeah.
from
Oh,
Trouvere.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
he makes it.
Okay. Well, then we can both submit to the admins at FetLife, right? Maybe we could come up with a better name than that between the two of us, right? But I definitely thrive off of that reaction, good, bad, or ugly, to be clear. Um, and I really, really think that, for me personally, that more that my person expresses their desires, their needs, and their wants, the more that, hmm, words. I don't know what more I would get out of it. And I don't want to like make it about elevation necessarily, but when someone, it goes back to making good decisions, more information. If you know, for 6 months, every time Rachel tried to touch my feet, I would get upset. But once she gave me more information, it was, now I have what I need to make that good decision. And yes, please rub my feet, right? Um, Nonetheless. So I think we have about enough time for one more question if you got one more answer.
Okay.
All right. Um, so the last question that I want to ask, well, actually, there's going to be a couple more questions, but this is that last official question.
Oh,
Like,
I
I'll
see.
ask you, like, right, but I'll ask you like if you got anything coming up, classes. So I can't say it's the last question, but the last question pertinent to the conversation, I think, is are there any specific challenges or obstacles that submissives face when they're expressing themselves to their dominant, and how can they be overcame? I
Well,
know.
I don't know about anybody else. For me, even though we talk about that, we talk all the time, quite often having the words to actually express it are difficult at times, especially if you don't know what you want. I I do frustrate him sometimes when I say, "Well, I don't know." I think that's probably the phrase that, well, I won't say it's the phrase he hates the most, but he certainly is not crazy about it. I got a raised eyebrow. But I am very introspective a lot of times in trying to determine what I want. And sometimes I think that I get wrapped up in that, and it's too intellectualized at the moment to necessarily then act on it. So it's either a lot of times I feel like I'm either intellectualizing it a lot and then taking all of this time in order to come up with an answer, or if I respond, but then it's not necessarily a fully formed expression of what it should be. Does that make sense?
I think I'm wrapping my head around it. I mean, with that said, my head's still spinning from half of this conversation.
Okay.
So
yeah, I think we'll leave it there because I don't know where I want to go. See, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know where I want to go.
So I'm gonna leave. There's something I used to work for a Japanese company, and I'm an engineer by trade. Specifically, I always worked like research and development, kind of did the stuff we're not supposed to do type of thing. Nonetheless, when I worked for this company, they did not like the word "I don't know," and in Japanese culture, at least how I was perceived with this one Japanese company. I've never been to Japan, so I don't know, but just how they expressed it was, I don't know is an excuse not to think. And I was like, it's kind of stuck with me. And you may not know the answer, but there's a better way to convey that information, especially like as an engineer, right? Like I get paid to know. So if I don't know, I better figure it out kind of thing. So I'll leave you with that thought on the I don't know, because like I said, it's stuck with me now for 16 or 18 years, and it's always resonated for lots of reasons, to where when I go to say it, I still like pause and like, nope, I'm gonna think, Dustin. I do have a question from the audience that I missed earlier.
Okay.
I do. So they ask, well, first they state, for communicating needs as a sub, here's a question. What about using aftercare time to vocalize what worked, what didn't, and how it could be improved in the future?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part. How?
It says, so for communicating needs as a sub, the question is, what about using aftercare time to vocalize what worked, what didn't, and how it can be improved in the future?
If that works for someone, then by all means. I don't.
That's an AAR.
I'm sorry.
That's an AAR.
That's an AAR. It's an after action.
What worked, what didn't, what.
Yeah, well, that's what worked and what didn't. So we do that for a lot of different things, but I don't necessarily know that we categorize it as aftercare. So maybe that's part of the thing. We do after actions for a number of different things, but we don't do them like immediately after the event. So say, for example, if we give a class, we may toss out some kinds of things, but there's usually a period that we have an opportunity to vegetate and think on it before we actually put pen to paper to say, this is what needs to go on the after action for what needs to change. So for example, if we were teaching a class, and somebody brought up something in the class that we had not considered before and threw us, because that's never happened, then as part of our ride home and what goes in some of the note stuff is we talk about, okay, so let's look at that example if that came up. Is that something that we're likely to encounter? Well, no. Is that something that probably should be included? maybe not exactly that one. Well, what would be a better example? But we've had, uh, I would say, significant time to allow us to think in terms of what we want to specifically address about it. So it's not necessarily just that, but it's the class as a whole, or maybe the weekend as a whole. Maybe, for example, one of the things as part of the letter of intent, I look through and pick out all the restaurants and things like that. I know what he prefers to eat, but perhaps we need to change that up the next time. So that's part of that kind of discussion. Same kind of thing can go in there on the needs and wants. So we are always talking in terms of what works, what didn't. I think part of the issue that is frustrating is that sometimes the same thing doesn't always work the next time around. If we're,
Mm.
especially if we're talking about play,
Yeah.
that could be based off of level of energy. It could be
Yep.
the time of day, could be the environment and the energy that we're not getting. You name it, been a number of different things. So it's not necessarily going to play the same. So do we talk about why we may not have met the expectations that we thought we were going to? Because a lot of times we will each have expectations of what we thought our play was going to occur, and it didn't maybe happen the same way that we anticipated. Okay, that's fine. But then we also talk about, well, what do we like about it? Because that's where we want to actually focus on it, not necessarily just the parts that didn't meet our expectations. Because we're going to always get something out of our play. And because otherwise, why would we continue to do it?
Oh, yeah. Right. I, I'm I am I'm appreciative that you brought to attention that something you like today, you may not necessarily like it as much tomorrow, right? And you brought attention to, like, based off your energy levels, your physical, mental, spiritual well-being, like all of this stuff plays into um how whatever interaction is perceived. And that kind of goes all the way back into like your voice, right? Or an S type's voice. And for me, like before I want to play, and I don't like to use that word often because I don't really think a lot of what I do is play. This is my life and I take it pretty seriously. And I know that we use the term play often. I personally think it diminishes some of the seriousness of it. And I think it also is used to escape some of the shame. But that's probably a whole nother topic, right?
So, what
Um,
word do you use then? I'm sorry.
Scene. I prefer this
Just a
a
scene?
scene.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for me that it carries a lot of power. It shows that it's a moment in time. There's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. Um, and the scene can be serious, the scene can be funny, the scene can be scary. Um, but for me, play, it just it it it's not play. Like for me personally, it that brings to I don't I'm stumbling on my words, but like I said, for play, it makes me think of like I'm outside on the kickball field, and if I scratch my knee or if I kick somebody in the face, it's not that big of a deal. It's just play. It's an accident. No, 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 no. If I'm suspending a wonderful, beautiful human and I don't return them safely to the ground, it's pretty serious to me personally. Um, and like I said, I personally play. I've used it. I've used it a lot, partly because it's readily accepted. But over the last couple years, as I've personally done an inventory of my personal vocabulary, right? It's a word that I'm more mindful on not using for my own interactions. I still use it because it is a term that is readily used by most of the community. There's a little bit of a my definition or differentiation between the words. So
Perfectly
I,
understandable. But I mean, that's something that we do all the time as we talk about, is that the word we want to use? So
yeah,
I
and
think that's a
like,
good thought. I hadn't thought in terms of using seen though, rather than play.
well, and maybe um we can have a conversation, or me or Trouvere can have a conversation when like our brains are fully functional in regards to it, because I would actually like to suss out more about that, and like not even that, but also speculation on why play is the readily accepted term.
Well,
But
one of the reasons we use it is because we use it in so many other contexts.
So
Life
he
is a game that we're
mm,
life.
did you hear him?
yeah, I did. Life's a
Okay.
game, and
Yeah,
yeah,
life's a game. Yeah, but we use it in a number of different
It's like
situations.
SCA.
Yeah, because we do play SCA, our medieval recreation group.
mm, yeah.
So I, you're right. It's probably a time for another conversation, but I do like the idea.
Well, then maybe we'll have to plan it.
Okay.
So, we'll go ahead and get this wrapped up. I'd like to ask, you guys got anything coming up? You guys writing any books, or you got any classes you're teaching?
Yes. And so I know that we are teaching, I want to say in October.
November.
No, oh, is it November? November, we're teaching for Virginia Beach for the Mass
I'm sorry, October for Virginia Beach, November for House Exeter.
Oh, it's October for Virginia Beach and November's for House Exeter.
And
So,
MSC.
and then we're both teaching at MSC, and I'll be a judge for MSC this year as well. Woo!
I need to make it out that way. MSC is in DC, correct?
Correct.
Okay, that's not horribly far for me. Um, it's not like trying to get down to Texas or anything.
That's true.
Wow. Well, my head's spinning. Like seriously, there's some words in my head that like I thought I was very clear on my definition personally. Um, and I think that I need to do some reflection and really think about that definition, and more so why I've defined it that way. The parallels between like us and like me and Trouvere, to be specific, is uncanny. Um, and just hearing more and more, it's just it it's probably why there is that attraction or that gravitational pull, like why we've communicated the way we have. Um, Nonetheless, I just want to express how thankful I am for your time, for your thoughts, your experience. You allowing me to share my thoughts and my experience as well. Um, I think that's all I got. Do you have any closing thoughts or anything else you'd like to express before we get off there?
I'd like to thank you for this opportunity. I really appreciate that and allowing me to speak. So
Of
thank you for
course.
that.
Of course. I personally think that everybody has something to say, and everybody should give it the opportunity to say it. So,
All right.
nonetheless, I appreciate everybody joining us tonight. Um, if you guys didn't hear, I made a post. I will not be airing next week. I will be traveling. So I'm taking next week off. And then I will be back the following week, June 6th, interviewing Infinite Devotion on positive masculinity. So it should be a good topic. Nonetheless, thank you for joining us.